Wyoming Territory, October 1879. The first snow had not yet come, but the land was cold, and the wind dragged the scent of rot and wet earth across the high plains. Kellan Boyd spotted the girl before his horse did a small shape curled up in a ditch by the edge of the trail, half covered in mud, arms wrapped around the ribs of a barely breathing dog. He pulled his horse to a stop. The animal snorted, uneasy. The girl did not move. Kellan swung down, boots sinking into the wet ground, and stepped closer. She was maybe 19 or 20, soaked through, her long brown hair matted with dirt, face gaunt and pale. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, one bare foot pale against the mud. The dog, an old mutt with graying fur, let out a low, pained whine but did not lift its head. "Miss." Kellan crouched beside her. She stirred, eyelids fluttering, then blinked up at him with eyes dull and distant. "He's dying," she whispered, fingers tightening around the dog's chest. "I do not want to let him go alone." Kellan stayed quiet for a moment, then he reached down, gently brushing her hair from her cheek. Her skin was cold. "You do not have to," he said. "You come with me, both of you." She blinked again, like she had not heard him right. "I have a wagon just a mile back," he added. "Come on, you are freezing." The girl hesitated, then tried to sit up, wincing. The dog let out another whine. She looked between them, her lips trembling. "I cannot carry you both at once," he said. "But I will come back for him. I promise on my life." She studied his face, searching for any lie, then finally nodded. Kellan lifted her carefully, her frame light as a feather in his arms. She clutched the front of his coat like she was afraid he might disappear. Mud smeared across his shirt, but he did not care. He carried her to the horse, set her in the saddle, and led them back to the wagon. He kept his word. He returned for the dog and laid him across a wool blanket in the wagon bed beside her. She never stopped watching, never stopped holding the animal's paw. They rode in silence toward his ranch. The cabin sat low against a rise, smoke curling from the chimney. A barn stood nearby, and to the east, a line of cottonwoods marked where the stream ran. It was not much, but it was safe and warm. Kellan helped her down, carried the dog again, and opened the cabin door. "You are home," he said quietly. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. She only nodded. Inside, he lit the lamp, coaxed the fire to life, and handed her a blanket. She sat beside the hearth, legs drawn close, while he laid the dog out on another blanket, tucking it around him. The animal's breathing was shallow but steady. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Odella," she whispered. "Odella Norrell," he nodded once. "I am Kellan Boyd." He did not ask her anything more that night, just brought her water, a plate of warm cornbread and beans, and a dry dress from a chest his sister had left behind when she married and moved east. Odella ate slowly. Her hands shook. When she finished, she looked up. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to," he said. "Just rest." She glanced at the dog again. "His name is Brisk." "Brisk," Kellan repeated, kneeling beside the old mutt. "Well, Brisk, you are a tough one." Odella's lips twitched just barely. She slept by the fire that night, one hand on Brisk's back. Kellan stayed nearby, watching the flames die down to coals. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, but inside it was finally quiet. In the morning, Brisk was still alive, weak but breathing. Odella opened her eyes slowly, then looked toward the dog with aching hope. "He made it," she whispered. Kellan smiled a little. "So did you." She sat up, brushing hair from her face. She looked cleaner now, warmer, but there was still something hollow behind her eyes. "Where are your people?" he asked gently. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I had 2 little sisters, Violet and Vera. We were sent west on an orphan train 2 years ago. A couple in Cheyenne took us in. And they kept the girls, sent me off after a month." Said I was too old and too strange. She stared at the floor. I tried to find work. Got taken in by a rancher outside Rawlins. He said I could clean in exchange for food, but she stopped. Her lips pressed into a line. I left. Been walking for days. Kellan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I could not leave Brisk behind, she added. He was the only thing that ever stayed. Kellan nodded once. He is safe now, you both are. She looked up at him. Why are you helping me? Because I would want someone to do the same if it was my sister out there. Odella's shoulders lowered slightly. Thank you. You can stay as long as you want, he said. There is work here if you want it, or you can rest. Either way, no one will put you out. She nodded slowly, like she was still waiting to wake up. That afternoon, she followed him out to the barn, Brisk limping along behind her. Kellan showed her the chicken coop, the feed shed, the well. She listened, quiet but alert. When he handed her a small sack of oats and said she could feed the hens if she liked, she took it with both hands. By dusk, there was color in her cheeks. She laughed once when Brisk chased a squirrel and fell over sideways. Kellan looked at her and smiled. She caught him watching and looked away fast. Inside the cabin, they ate stew and bread. He told her about the land, about the stray horses he sometimes traded in Laramie, about his brother who had died in the war and the mother who still wrote letters from Missouri. She listened like she wanted to remember it all. That night, she slept on the cot again, curled beside Brisk. Kellan lay awake for a long time. He did not know what had brought her to that ditch, or how many shadows she carried in her bones. But he knew the way she had looked at him when he said she was home, and he knew he meant it. The frost came by the end of the week. Kellan had set his traps early that morning, and when he returned, Odella was kneeling by the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, shaping dough with a sure, steady rhythm. The warmth from the fire painted her skin gold, and for a moment he just stood holding the door open, boots dripping meltwater onto the floor. "You're letting the cold in," she said without looking up. He shut the door behind him and hung his coat by the hearth. "Smells better than anything I've cooked." She glanced over her shoulder. "It's just cornmeal and lard. Nothing fancy." "Still," he said, setting the small pile of pelts near the wall, "you've got a hand for it." Odella didn't answer, but her fingers slowed as she pressed the last piece of dough into the pan. Brisk lay close by, wrapped in a folded quilt, his breathing easier than it had been. Kellan crossed to the wash basin and scrubbed the dirt from his hands. "You ever do any trapping? Or skinning?" She shook her head. "Closest I got was helping the butcher's wife in Cheyenne. She let me grind bones for soup stock." He nodded, dried his hands. "If you're willing, I could show you how to stretch hides. Good trade skill, even if you don't use it long." Odella turned, brushing flour off her palms. "I'd like that." They spent the rest of the morning in the lean-to beside the barn, Kellan showing her how to clean around the edges without tearing the pelt. Odella watched closely. Her hands were delicate, but she didn't flinch at the work. "You've got grit," he said, tying off one of the hides. She gave a small nod. "I had to grow some." Snow began falling after supper, not heavy but enough to frost the edges of the window panes. Kellan added more wood to the fire, then sat on the floor to whittle a broken latch back into shape. Odella sat nearby, mending a tear in the lining of her borrowed coat. "Where'd you learn to sew like that?" he asked. "Boarding house in Topeka. The matron made us stitch our own sheets if we ripped them." Sounds strict, she was, but she kept the girls safe. "I never forgot that." Brisk let out a soft huff in his sleep. Odella bent to scratch behind his ears, lips pressed in a faint smile. "You want to write your sisters?" Kellan asked carefully. "I could take a letter into town next week." Odella's hand paused on the dog's neck. "They're better off not knowing where I am. I don't want to pull them into anything." He didn't press. That night, He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind skitter dry snow across the roof. The cot creaked once as Odella shifted, then went still again. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew the house no longer felt empty. The next morning she was already outside when he stepped into the yard. She had on a wool cap and his sister's old boots, oversized but laced tight. She was hauling water, breath rising in pale clouds. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." He watched her shoulders move as she lifted the bucket. "I was thinking," she said, setting it down near the trough. "If you've still got that old loom in the attic, I could try weaving some feed sacks into rugs." "Might fetch something in Laramie." Kellan raised an eyebrow. "You can weave, when I'm not freezing or starving, yes." He laughed, the sound catching in the cold air. "I'll pull it down later." By mid-afternoon, the clouds had cleared and soft sunlight glinted off the snow-crusted fences. Kellan brought out 2 horses and asked if she wanted to ride. Odella hesitated beside the gate, squinting at the saddle. "I haven't been on one since Kansas." He swung himself up with practiced ease. "No time like now." She mounted slower, adjusting her balance. The horse shifted under her, but she steadied. They rode along the creek's edge, branches bare overhead. Odella's cheeks were ruddy from the cold and the ride, and once when her horse kicked up a spray of snow, she laughed, free and bright. "You look different when you laugh," Kellan said, reining in near the timberline. She quieted a little, eyes still bright. "I feel different, like I'm remembering something I thought I lost." Neither of them spoke for a while. The wind dipped low through the trees, and in the distance, a hawk circled slow against the blue. When they returned to the cabin, the sun was setting. Kellan unsaddled the horses while Odella gathered kindling. They moved without needing to speak. Later, as she stitched pieces of burlap into place by the fire, she asked, "What made you stay out here? All this space, just you?" He stretched his legs toward the hearth. "I came home from the war with noise in my head, couldn't sleep near towns. Couldn't stand folks asking questions." Odella didn't look up. "And now I like that I can hear the wind and know it's just wind." She tied off her thread slowly. "I think I'd like to stay a while if that's still all right." Kellan met her eyes. "It is." She leaned back, the firelight soft on her face. "Then I will." The loom took most of the afternoon to carry down, awkward through the cabin's narrow stairwell. Kellan had to wedge it sideways, and when one of the legs scraped the wall, Odella leaned forward from the landing above. "You break any part of it and I'm making you spin the thread by hand." He glanced up, out of breath. "You're awful bossy for someone using my attic. You're awful slow for someone with shoulders like that." He laughed then, a low, honest sound that surprised them both. By sundown, she had the thing upright near the east window, where the light came in long and gold. She ran her fingers over the frame, checking for splits in the wood. The warp beam creaked but held firm. "My mother had one like this," she said, kneeling beside it. "She used to say weaving was like praying with your hands." Kellan looked over from the hearth, where he was oiling the hinges of the back door. "You remember much about her?" "I remember she sang when she worked. Hummed, mostly. Even when she was tired. Even when we didn't have enough food for supper." Odella didn't say anything more, but her fingers lingered on the frame like she was touching something far older than wood. Kellan set the oil can down. "You need anything to start, just rags and time." They settled into a rhythm after that. He spent the mornings tending the fence line and checking on the cattle, while she sorted through old cloth and spun what she could salvage into makeshift yarn. She worked with quiet focus, feet moving the petals, hands weaving color into pattern. One cold morning, Kellan returned from the creek with a brace of pheasants and found her fitting the final panel of burlap into place. "You ever think about staying?" he asked, setting the birds on the table. She didn't look up. "I'm still here, aren't I?" "That's not what I meant." For a long while, the only sound was the steady clack of the loom. Then she said, "I don't know how to belong anywhere, not really." "Belonging doesn't come first," he said. "It comes after you stay long enough." Odella's hands paused on the shuttle. "You think I could?" "I think you already are." That night, after the lamps were turned low and the fire had gone to embers, they sat across from each other at the table, finishing the last of the root vegetables. Brisk slept under the bench, his breath quiet, steady. Odella turned her fork slowly on the plate. "Back in Rawlins, the rancher, he said I'd never be worth the food I ate, that I was just trouble in a dress." Kellan set down his tin cup. "He was wrong. I know that now," she said. "But sometimes I still hear it in my head." "You're not trouble," he said. "And you're worth more than any man who'd say that." The words landed between them, heavy and certain. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. Odella rubbed her arms and stood. "I'll add wood to the stove." Kellan rose too. "I'll help." They moved together, quiet and sure. He opened the door to the wood box while she steadied the iron tongs. When the logs caught, the fire flared up, lighting her face in flickering amber. She looked at him, and something in her expression shifted, less guarded now, less thin. "You're different than I expected." "How's that?" "I thought cowboys only knew how to shoot things and spit tobacco," he grinned. "I can spit if that'll help." She shook her head, laughing softly. "No, thank you." They stood a long while in the warmth, neither moving to leave. The air between them felt changed, like a thread drawn taut. Kellan spoke first. "You're not just passing through anymore, are you?" Odella didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. "I'd like it," he said, voice low, "if you stayed past the thaw, past spring even." Her eyes held his. "Then I will." He didn't touch her, not yet. But something passed between them, solid as earth. By the time the fire settled, the snow outside had started again. Fine, slow flakes drifting down like ash. Kellan banked the coals while Odella folded the worn cloth she'd been working on all week. Brisk stirred once in his sleep, then went still again. The house held its quiet, but nothing inside it felt empty anymore. By late November, the creek had frozen over in the shallows, and the cattle gathered closer to the low pines for shelter. The mornings came hard, with frost thick on the window glass and breath hanging in the air even inside the cabin. Kellan rose early to keep the stove hot, and by the time Odella stepped into the main room, coffee was already heating on the flame-black kettle. She pulled her shawl tighter as she came in, her fingers red from the cold. "I've never seen a winter start this fast." "Last year the snow didn't stay till Christmas," Kellan said, pouring the coffee into 2 tin mugs. "This year's impatient." She took the cup, warming her hands around it. Her hair was braided back today, smooth and neat, the ends tied with a strip of blue calico. Kellan noticed it but said nothing. The loom sat silent behind her. She had finished the first rug the day before and laid it out near the hearth, the colors deep with rust and faded gold, like prairie grass after a burn. He hadn't known scraps could become something that fine. "I want to ride into town soon," she said after a sip. "Trade some of the weaving, see if I can get needles and linen thread." "You feel up for that?" he asked. "I'm not afraid of town," she said. "Just didn't have a reason to go before." He nodded, then added, "I'll go with you." She didn't argue. They hitched the wagon at first light 2 days later. Brisk stayed curled on the porch, watching with tired eyes. Kellan gave him a leftover biscuit and a scratch behind the ears before climbing up beside her. The road to town was packed with snow and rutted from wagon wheels, the kind of cold that settled deep in the lungs. Odella wrapped her coat tighter and leaned into the warmth between them without speaking. Kellan kept the team steady, watching the ridgeline for drifts. As the town came into view, she shifted beside him. I don't expect kindness here. I won't let anyone give you less. On the main street, buildings stood close and wind-bitten. The livery, 2 saloons, a store with a faded sign, and a post office that leaned northward like it had grown tired of standing straight. Kellan pulled up in front of the store and helped her down. Inside, the warmth hit fast, smelling of flour and tobacco and old wood. The shopkeeper, a wiry man with a crooked mustache, looked up from behind the counter. He wore a wool vest and a wary expression. "You're Kellan Boyd," he said. Kellan nodded. "This is Odella Norrell." The man tipped his head slow. "You're the one been weaving." "I am," she said, setting the folded rug on the counter. The shopkeeper ran a hand over the texture. "Well, I'll be damned. That's fine work." Odella didn't smile, but her chin lifted slightly. He offered her 3 skeins of coarse thread, a tin of pins, and a bolt of muslin. She took the deal without hesitation. Outside, the wind had picked up. Kellan carried the supplies back to the wagon while Odella paused beside the hitching post. A woman walked past with a basket of kindling, then did a double take, staring hard at her. Odella kept her eyes forward. As soon as they were back on the road, she said, "She knew me." "From Cheyenne," she nodded. "Worked in the same house. She used to take the letters from my sisters before I could read them." Kellan didn't say anything for a while. Then, low, "If you ever want to find them again, I'll help." "I don't know what I'd say if I did," she said. "But thank you." The wind dropped as they turned off the main road. The land stretched wide again, pale with snow and edged in cottonwoods. Odella reached into the sack beside her and pulled out a small square of muslin. "What's that?" he asked. "Just something I want to try." "I've never stitched a quilt before. You planning to stay long enough to finish it?" She looked at him sidelong, then down at the cloth. "I'm not planning to leave." The words settled into the hush between them like a stone in deep water. That night, after the fire was banked and the shutters drawn, she laid the muslin on the table and drew a shape with charcoal, the outline of a house with smoke rising from the chimney. Kellan leaned on the far wall, watching her. "That ours?" She didn't look up. "It will be." He crossed the room and stood beside her. Her hand was still. The charcoal smudged slightly where her thumb had pressed it. "You draw often?" he asked. "Used to when there were quiet hours. Not many of those, though." He reached out and ran a finger along the edge of the cloth. "You've got a talent for turning scraps into something worth keeping." Odella met his eyes. "So do you." The room held still. He reached for her hand, slow and sure. She didn't pull away, just laced her fingers through his like she'd been waiting for it. Outside, the wind moved against the walls, but inside, there was nothing uncertain. Her hand fit in his like it had a place there, and neither of them let go. The quilt grew slowly, 1 square at a time, spread across the table beside the loom. Odella stitched by the window most mornings, watching the sky shift pale over the cottonwoods. Her hands moved with purpose now, not just out of habit, but with a kind of quiet joy that hadn't lived in her for years. Kellan noticed it in other ways, too, the way she hummed softly while folding laundry, how she left tiny bundles of dried herbs above the stove, or how she'd taken to brushing the horses without being asked. She didn't wait for permission anymore. She moved through the cabin like she belonged. One morning, after feeding the chickens, Odella wiped her hands on her apron and called over her shoulder, "You still got that old trunk in the shed?" "What for?" Kellan asked, hoisting a bale of hay. "I want to make a place for the weaving. If I'm going to keep at it, I can't have fabric piled all over the floor like it's been." He set the bale down and straightened. "Didn't think you were making more." "I sold the one in town, and the shopkeeper asked if I had others." He nodded once, then turned toward the shed. "I'll help you carry it in." The trunk was heavy with old tools and rusted hinges, but they cleared it out and scrubbed it clean by sunset. Odella lined the bottom with rough muslin and folded the woven pieces inside, careful and precise. That night, Kellan sat near the fire with a ledger open on the table, pencil tapping against the paper. Odella glanced over as she poured hot water into a basin. "What are you adding up?" "Thinking about spring," he said. "If I sell off the 3 heifers, I could afford to fence the east pasture." She set down the kettle. "That slope's too thin for grazing. You'd be better off planting oats." Kellan looked up. "You've got a better eye for land than most men I've met." "I've had to notice things," she said. "When your safety depends on reading a room or a stretch of field, you learn fast." He leaned back, pencil still in hand. "You ever think of claiming land for yourself?" "I didn't think I could," she said. "Not before." He didn't press, but the look he gave her lingered longer than most words. Later, while folding the last of the dry linens, Odella paused and said, "I've been thinking about Christmas." Kellan raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "I'd like to make a gift for you. You already fixed my latches, sorted my feed sacks, and kept Brisk alive." "That's more than any gift." She smiled, faint but steady. "Still, I want to." She didn't say what it would be, and he didn't ask. When the holiday came, it was quiet. The snow was deep and windless, and the world outside the cabin felt still, like it was holding its breath. Odella woke first and placed a wrapped bundle on the table before starting the fire. Kellan came in from the barn with his coat dusted in frost and his hair damp from the cold. "For you," she said, nodding toward the bundle. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a hand-stitched shirt, thick linen dyed soft gray, with embroidery at the collar, a pattern of pine needles and river reeds, subtle but thoughtful. He ran a thumb over the stitches. "This is the finest shirt I've ever owned. I thought you might wear it when you ride into Laramie next time," she said. "Seems right you should look the part if folks are going to treat you like a man with something to protect." He looked at her for a long moment. "There's more than one thing I'd protect with my life." She didn't look away. "I know." He stepped closer, the linen still in his hands. "I didn't bring you anything wrapped, but I've been carving something. It's not finished yet." "Can I see?" He walked to the shelf, pulled down a small cloth bundle, and unwrapped it. Inside was a wooden figure, a woman standing beside a dog, both carved with care. The details were still rough, the edges not yet sanded, but she recognized herself at once. "I've never had something made for me," she said, voice low. "You have now." She reached out, touched the figure's shoulder. Her fingers brushed his as she did, and neither of them pulled back. "You know," she said, "I never thought I'd find someone who saw me and didn't flinch." "I see you," he said. "I did the first moment you looked up from that ditch." Odella's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She simply stepped into his arms, settled her forehead to his shoulder, and breathed deep. They stood like that a long time, the fire casting gold against the walls. By spring, the thaw had come and gone. The creek ran heavy with meltwater, and the fence line held firm across the west pasture. Odella planted oats where the slope caught the sun, and Kellan dug a new wellhead near the barn. They married in early May, with the cottonwoods just leafing out and the sky high and hard blue. The only witnesses were Brisk, 2 curious hens, and the wind moving through the grass. Kellan wore her stitched shirt. She wore a dress made of pieced muslin, simple and clean, with her mother's melody on her lips. They exchanged no promises, but the ones made by showing up each day, by waking at each other's side, by planting roots in the same ground. The quilt she'd started that first winter hung at the foot of their bed, squares stitched with the shapes of their seasons. The loom, the creek, the figure of a woman and a man standing side by side with a dog between them. Sometimes on still evenings, she sat at the loom again, weaving strips of cloth into something useful. Kellan would read by the fire or mend tack, and Brisk would sleep at the hearth, older now but content. Neither of them spoke of what had come before. They didn't need to. They had this: the hush of dusk settling over the hills, the warmth of a hand always reaching back, the certainty that no storm could shake what they'd built together. And that was more than enough.